So the overview, I'm going to talk about some of the elemental provisions and a few little tips on how to use them and how and why they're different. NatHERS tips for higher ratings will come out from the case studies. I've got additional slides that I put together. I've run a few CPD units on this for Design Matters National, and I've got some extra stuff that I'm not presenting, but will be there in the copies of the slides if you want them. I'll go through 2 case studies, 5 to 6 stars with an outdoor living area from 2 of the RIS houses in Brisbane and Toowoomba. If I had more than half an hour, of course, I'd do Cairns and I'd do Longreach and all the rest of them. And then I've just got a couple of slides on some practical outcomes from the whole of home. You'll see in the tables for insulation that there are a number of, and this shows there's an X, and that means that that solution isn't available and deemed to satisfy. So you can either use NatHERS or change the properties of that building to something that doesn't have an X, or you can do another solution that allows trade-offs, like a reference building approach to keep us going. One of the things that was in the back of my mind, unfortunately didn't actually make it into the NCC 2022, was in each climate zone, there are 2 wall types shown. One of them has no thermal mass, the other has heaps of thermal mass. And the idea was that the recommended wall R values could be assigned to any wall based on the thermal mass of the construction. So if you've got concrete block walls, for example, in Cairns, concrete block on the inside, the R value that's recommended is a certain level. But if you had a brick cavity house, you could also use those same R values in the external walls. If you've got a timber house, a lightweight construction, then no internal walls have thermal mass, then you use the R values from the wall types that has no thermal mass. So it wasn't meant to be, oh, you can only have masonry veneer and masonry cavity in Mildura. It was meant to be, you've got 2 classes of walls, one where the external wall and all the internal walls have thermal mass, and another where they don't. You'll see, so insulating your subfloor walls is now a thing. The benefit is that it keeps that subfloor cooler in hot climates. It stops the heat gain or reduces the heat gain from the outside. And as I like to say, where does the dog go in summer to keep cool? It goes under the house. It's nice and cool under there. So if you're making those subfloor, that subfloor cooler by reducing the heat gain through your subfloor walls, then that's going to get you a better outcome. So in the elemental provisions, it's now got requirements for subfloor wall insulation. Of course, you've got to make sure that you don't obstruct your subfloor vents. And of course, it has to be a moisture impermeable type of insulation. So the next thing is, well, I use an outdoor living area, I get a 1-star credit, and in the QDC that applies to Climate Zone 5 as well. So if I'm looking at 6 stars, I should be using the old 6-star glazing calculator. Maybe not. Let me show you what I mean. We went through a couple of the houses and we looked at the glazing requirements at 6 stars with the new calculator, and also at 7 stars, 7 stars with the new calculator and 6 stars with the old calculator. And in a number of the climates, the new calculator, which correlates much better to the outcomes you get NatHERS than previous, and no aspersions cast at ABCB for that, because when the last calculator was being developed, second generation NatHERS tools were still being developed and there were no star bands. So it was very hard to calibrate that previous calculator back to NatHERS. So you'll see in Brisbane, unfortunately, and in Climate Zone 5, there's no large savings. But in all the other climate zones, check out the 7-star calculator to get compliant glazing with your elemental evaluations, rather than go back to that old 6-star calculator. The new calculator has got some new data inputs. If you don't put in those data inputs correctly, it's going to be a lot harder in a lot of cases. So there's things like, what type of room is it in? Is it a bedroom, utility area, or other, like a living area? What sort of floor is it? Is it in direct contact with the ground? Is it an upper floor? Is it a timber floor? What's the floor covering, particularly on a slab? It doesn't affect timber floors at all. The colour of the frame and the openability of the windows. In fact, the previous requirements in the elemental provisions about having openable, higher area of openable windows did not give you anywhere near as much the benefit of higher openability that the new glazing calculator does, because it is tied back into outcomes that you get from NatHERS. Now, in the calculator itself, there's a little tab that says new features. I just recommend read those thoroughly. So that's elemental, a few tips on navigating through that. Now I want to travel back in time and talk about a project I started in 2014 that was eventually published in 2017 that looked at how the CHNATH engine, that's the thing that does all the calculations in NatHERS, calculates performance in hot climates. And so we looked at a range of houses, a couple of standard houses and some archetypal, well-ventilated houses. And one of the things we looked at was, well, for those standard type houses, what sort of energy or energy rating benefit do you get from implementing typical hot climate design strategies? So we looked at louver windows, tinted glass, lighter colours, deep verandas, lightweight construction, elevated construction and ceiling fans. And you'll see in Townsville, you get, if you replace all the sliding and awning windows with louver windows, you picked up a star, in excess of a star. Tinted glazing, 0.7 stars. Lighter colours compared to dark colours, 2 stars. A deep veranda all the way around the house rather than the dinky little 450 eave that we tend to put on, that's giving you a 1.5 stars in Townsville. Lightweight construction was worse, but that is compared to being on a slab, and the temperature underneath that slab is much more benign. It's much closer to the comfort temperature, that temperature of the ground. During the middle of the day, if you're on a slab, you're losing heat to the ground. And that's a good thing if you want to minimize your actual energy use, because the highest energy loads are in the middle of the day to late afternoon. We looked at elevated compared to a slab on ground. Well, we didn't make any other changes to these standard buildings, elevating them. But of course, the typical Queenslander, which my wonderful partner, Mary Ann, comes from Gladstone and lived in a Queenslander, and I stayed up there several times. Yes, you've got the louver windows, you've got the lighter colours, you've got the deep veranda. But just raising it for a standard volume builder house doesn't give you a benefit. Ceiling fans is 1.2 stars. Brisbane, much less benefit because you've also got some heating, but I'll tell you a little bit more later Brisbane's got more cooling because of the new climate data than it used to have, which probably means it always had more cooling than NatHERS was assuming, because the new climate data is much more accurate these days. Toowoomba benefits are not that big. It's a lot cooler. The other thing we looked at is, does it simulate a sealed box? This has been a criticism of NatHERS for a while. And again, another little table. This is showing the percentage of the time that windows were opened to provide comfort compared to the amount of time that the aircon was on. Now, the ChNath engine tests every hour. If I open the windows, it predicts the airspeed through all of the rooms of the house. It knows at certain airspeeds, this is how much more comfortable it will feel. Those algorithms were designed by Steve Zoccolai, who I'm sure lots of you in Queensland have heard of. And it says, okay, if I can open the windows and keep cool, I won't turn on the aircon. Now, in a place like Townsville, even a standard house was opening the windows to keep cool 2/3 of the time and only air conditioning 8%. Interestingly, the tropical house was opening the windows about the same amount of time, but it was actually only air conditioning 4.6% of the time. So around half as often. The trouble is, when the air isn't moving in a well-ventilated tropical design, then the loads for air conditioning are a bit higher. So even though it was only air conditioning half as often, because the loads were higher when it was air conditioning, they get the same rating. You'll see similar sorts of things in Brisbane. Opening the windows 45% of the time, air conditioning just 1% of the time. So lots of data in that. You can see that report on the NatHERS website, and if you've got copies of the slides, you can look that up on the NatHERS website. But it definitely doesn't simulate a sealed box. Is it perfect? Probably not. But it isn't a sealed box. So I'll present to you a couple of case studies, and these were the houses that we used in the RIS, both on a timber floor, not an elevated timber floor, but just a timber floor. Both have an outdoor living area. And in the two most high volume construction climate zones in Queensland, in Toowoomba, NatHERS Climate 50 Oakey, and NCC Climate 5, and Brisbane, NatHERS Climate 10, NCC Climate 2. And I'll show you the sorts of changes that we had to make in order to go from 5 to 6. Now, you'll see that the changes you need to make don't cost you tens of thousands of dollars, probably only a few $1,000s. So bear with government. If you've got something that's costing you 20 or 30,000, this is the information they're seeing. So they don't have evidence of this. This could mean two things. One is, well, maybe you need to go back to scratch on that particular design. Often, when we were doing the consultation for NCC 2022, we had a lot of houses come in saying, this is really expensive. Well, it was expensive for two reasons. One is way too much glass. And that's really going to kill you at 7 stars. And the other was costed using one-off costs. If you're a volume builder, or even if you're a small builder, you can set up supply contracts and you can get things cheaper. So the initial costs that we saw from industry where they're having a problem were not silly, but just it was thinking about things from the old 6-star perspective and not the 7-star perspective, where you've got to have a different mindset. So, but before I do get into that, this little chart shows the change in the heating cooling proportion in all the different climate zones. Brisbane you can see from that one, it's in this, oh, I've got more cooling than I used to. Amberley and Oakey, which is used for Toowoomba, I've got more heating than I used to. So if you open up a house that used to get 5 stars with your outdoor living area, and it doesn't get near 5 stars this time around, it could be because Queensland is unfortunately one of those states that have got some of the climate zones that have changed a fair bit. Now, they better reflect reality than they used to, but you might find that the strategies you used to get to 5 stars are not what you need now to get to 6 stars with the new weather data. So I'll just skip that for brevity. So the first house, I believe this is a Dennis Family Homes house. Thank you to them. They provided this house for the RIS and several other projects. As I said, we did north faces the street, backyard faces south. You've got east and west glazing and no overshadowing buildings on the east and west. And the front is facing north, so any benefits you could get in winter are all taken up by that garage, taking up most of the facade. I should add, we did the whole thing in brick veneer. We didn't use lightweight cladding on the upper floor. So in Brisbane, and you'll see here's some of these tables again that will be familiar to people who've looked at the cost benefit evaluation, that report that I wrote for NCC 2022. Gary showed some examples from that. And again, in the extra slides I've provided, there's links to that report. That report shows the changes to every house on a slab and a timber floor in every climate. So have a look at that if you're struggling now. Find the house that's closest to the one that you're struggling with from that report, and have a look at the properties of that. That might give you a head start. Changes here are shown in blue highlight. So yes, as Anthony's found, a bit more ceiling insulation in Brisbane, a bit more wall insulation, insulated the subfloor. The ceiling fans, we've moved still the same number of fans, but we're using wider fans. So we're looking at 1,400 fans rather than 1,200 fans. Reason being, firstly, they provide a bit higher airspeed, and secondly, their effect is felt over a greater proportion of the room. When it comes to the glazing, at 5 stars, clear single glaze was fine. At 6 stars, you need some single low E with a tint. Not the whole house. Always focus that high performance glazing, if you're an assessor, on the rooms with the highest cooling loads. And we also used on the upper floor some louver windows, only 3.6 square meters. Yeah, louver windows are expensive, but it's one of the solutions to that openable window on a second floor having to have a 1700 fixed glazing. Now, you can get lots of windows where you can put all the openable bit above 1700. For this, I thought, well, it's Queensland, I better pop some louvers in. And we reduced the total window area by about 5 square meters. Now, the stuff in the portal shows what happens on average. This is down the worst end of things. So this is a timber floored house. It doesn't face the right way. So we're trimming back the glazing a bit more in Brisbane. Interestingly, when I put neighbours on, assuming a fairly dense subdivision, the rating improved by 0.3 stars because there's a lot more cooling in Brisbane than there used to be. And I didn't look at those elevated houses for this particular one. That's still something where, yes, there may be issues, and I'm happy to talk to people afterwards about those and what sort of solutions there may be. But in the RIS, as I said, we looked at these archetypal houses. One was based on a tropo design. One was based on a sort of passive solar design, but elevated. We found that with those houses, not only could you have way more glazing because they were well oriented, but it was cheaper to comply than the volume houses. Okay, in Toowoomba, a similar sort of story, increasing the R value of the ceiling and the walls, putting some subfloor wall insulation in, using more and bigger diameter ceiling fans, a little bit of single low E in Toowoomba, but now more double glazing. At 5 stars, with the new weather data, you would have had to have had about half the glazing with single low E. Now, you've got a little bit of single low E and about half the glazing being double glazed. Again, put the double glazing in the rooms that have got the highest heating loads. Don't bother whacking it in a bedroom. It probably doesn't have high heating loads. And we cut back the glass area again, about 4.5 square metres. Another plan, thank you to the HIA for this one. They've been using this plan in the past to look at the impacts of regulations. And it's got a little outdoor living area that we've added. It's got that minimum depth, 2.5 metres, open on 2 sides. And if you really look hard, it's got a ceiling fan as well. Same sort of story. In Brisbane, more ceiling insulation, using a lighter coloured roof. Colours always can help, but it's a design by design thing. So, you know, colours of roof, walls, window frame. Experiment with them. You might find with a particular house, it's got a bit more heating than cooling in this particular climate. So a darker colour would work. If it's got more cooling than heating, then lighter colours will work. Sometimes, you know, in places like Toowoomba, it doesn't make much difference. In this case, the lighter coloured roof did. Again, more insulation in the walls, some subfloor wall insulation, increasing the diameter of those fans, and putting in some additional single low E tinted glazing, trimming back the glass areas using a slightly lighter frame colour. When we put neighbours either side in this one, it actually reduced, this is what I'm trying to say here, but it didn't come out, actually reduced the rating in a place like Toowoomba. In a place like Brisbane, it increases the rating again, not by as much though, because this time I was assuming that you had a single story house overshadowing the single story house. In Toowoomba, again, more insulation, more fans, bigger fans, starting to use some double glazed low E now. My tip with double glazing is use the low E argon fill. Don't bother with the bog standard double glazing. We did a whole lot of work to look at what was the best bang for buck once we had all the window costs in. And what we found was you'll need to use less double glazing if it's higher performance. The other thing I think too is there's a number of window manufacturers now providing windows with an inline reveal. So the timber reveal covers the metal frames. That I'm aware of, and there may be more, A&L, they've always had that, AWS and Southern Star. At least I know Southern Star were developing things like that. I think they're available now. And they provide you with free extra, 0.2, 0.3 stars. So think about the windows you're using when you're specifying your double glazing. An inline reveal double glazed window will typically have 25% less heat loss in winter. So don't need to necessarily go to the really expensive and chunky thermally broken frames. There's absolutely a place for them. But if you're looking for the least cost, go for those inline reveals. Couple of little things now just on the whole of home outcomes. I looked at in Brisbane, 150, 250 and a 400 square metre house with a 3-star ducted reverse cycle and a 5-star gas instantaneous hot water system, and said, well, how much PV would you need? And as the house gets a bit bigger, you need more, but they're still all under 3. No one puts in less than 3. So if you have 3 kilowatts of PV, you can pretty much have any size, any efficiency of appliance that you like in Brisbane. If you have a pool, you generally have to add about an extra kilowatt. Again, it's not till you get to 400 square metres that you're looking at going over 3. But you can change your appliances. You can go to more efficient appliances. And as a general rule, a heat pump hot water system or a solar off-peak electric will mean you don't need any PV. You might need to have 4-star air conditioners as well. But, you know, if you put in the sort of maximum size that you have in most suburban locations of 6.5 kilowatts, anything you like as far as appliances, and you will overcomply. You'll be way over 60. And finally, same sort of thing in Toowoomba, similar sorts of PV requirements with the same combination of heating, cooling. At a pool, now you're adding about 1.3 kilowatts to get compliance. And pretty similar story. Yes, you can avoid PV if you get efficient enough appliances, and again, heat pump or solar hot water system, you can avoid it. If your clients want PV anyway, it gives them a whole lot more flexibility in the appliances they choose. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.